The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Imagine if one of the best songwriters in Nashville decided to devote all his creative energies to making music and books and a television show for children. You don't have to imagine it because it's already happened. Randall Goodgame is the mastermind behind the Slugs Bugs franchise. I think you're going to love hearing from him. Randall Goodgame, I'm so glad you're here. I love you. I also love your work. Slugs and Bugs music, Slugs and Bugs books, a Slugs and Bugs TV show, which I think will have started by the time this podcast airs, right?
Yeah, man.
When does that release? When is that, or whatever the word is?
It's the either end of September or beginning of October.
That's very exciting.
Yeah, man.
And I want to get back. I want to circle back around to television because I don't know that I've had a television writer on the podcast yet. So I want to talk about that. But first, I want to talk about this idea. I just want to talk about writing for children.
Sure.
You know, because when we met before Slugs and Bugs started, and I loved your music, your Randall Goodgame music for grown-ups so much. And then, and I loved, the first Slugs and Bugs record when it came out. But then when you said, I think this is what I'm going to do is children's music. I'm now the Slugs and Bugs guy. I'm now a children's, now I write for children. I'm not going to be doing the nearly as much of the grown-up music. There were lots of friends who pushed back and said, Randall, you are like a genius at writing grown-up music. Why are you, not doing that anymore? And I was one of those people who had my doubts.
I remember. I remember all too well. Yeah, man, it was crazy. I'd never experienced anything like that before, where usually, your ideas, your community, your friends, even my wife, people that I would tell, they either would look at me sideways like, wait, really? You're not going to do the other, like you're writing songs for adults? And Amy, we still laugh about it because she just didn't. She was like, I don't know how that's going to work. I don't know why you'd want to do that. Yeah. And it's such a there's a lot of things I think about that. One is sometimes you've just you just got to go with your gut. However the Lord communicates calling, I had never felt quite so sure that I was fit for something before like that in my life. And it also, it's been great fun for me to kind of turn it around on friends like you and Andrew that questioned whether it was a good idea to, because in truth, it sort of points a finger at how much do you really value children's works, because we all say, it's important to make good stuff for kids, but then when you saw one of your friends that you liked what his skill level, and so to think of it might be wasted on kids is it's a good sort of cautionary tale about what we think about how we think about what children are worth.
Yeah. So tell me about, you're obviously all in on writing for children. What have you learned in that process, or what have you, just tell me about that.
Sure. Man, so much. One reason I think that writing for kids helps me so much is you just get to be sincere. And that's just kind of my happy place. When children just want to know the truth. They want to know not like a sideways version of it. They don't want you to be sarcastic. They just want, even whether you're being silly or you're being serious, they just want you to be simple and sincere. And I grew up in a home where sincerity was just the name of the game. There wasn't the only laughter in my house had to do with silliness. There wasn't a lot of sarcasm. Nobody liked being made fun of. Not a lot of finger pointing type of play. So it's great fun for me to dive into a story or thinking about life in a way that I can just be really honest and sincere about what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking, and because I trust that that's what this audience, I can trust that that's what this audience wants. Okay, so what is it? Emily Dickinson says, "Tell the truth, but tell it slant." Her approach, and so many writers' approach to telling the truth is you got to find some slant, and you're suggesting that in your line of work, you can be a little more straight on, straight ahead. Is that fair to say? I think so. I think when I'm writing, maybe the slant is it's inward, or let me sure how to say it. When I'm approaching writing for kids, I'm not thinking that I'm trying to teach them something. Okay. I'm approaching them as at least a peer, at least someone that knows as much about life as I do, because they've got something that I've lost. They've got a sense of sincerity about the world. We sort of cloak how we feel, and we put on masks in front of one another, and children don't do that. They just are who they are, and I want to return to that and get back to that. So at the very least, I feel like I'm writing to someone, for someone that is an equal, if not someone I have to learn from. Yeah. It makes me think of in 3 out of 4 Gospels, Jesus says, if you don't come to me like a child, you can't come into the kingdom. And so I read that and think, okay, well, I want to be like a child. Yeah. In 1 Corinthians, he says, Paul talks about he gives up childish ways. So you've got that also to consider. You don't want to be an immature person. Yeah. But one thing I think Jesus is getting at is being bare with our neediness and exposed with our messiness, pure in our faith, just trusting, like our kids. They don't wonder, in a healthy family, they don't wonder where their food's coming from. They just expect it. Yeah. And God, Jesus, wants us to just expect Him to provide. So if kids are naturally that way, and I'm not, then I want to learn from them. I want to learn that from them. So I'm writing to people that I hope approve of, and I'm trying to reach a level of sincerity and authenticity. So maybe the slant is trying to reach for something that is maybe beyond my grasp, and just doing the best I can to get there. Yeah,
Yeah. When you talk about this idea of children having a purity that we, and an honest approach to the truth and caring about what's true rather than, I was thinking in terms of, you spoke in terms of, our tendency to hide or to be sarcastic. Another way that we approach truth is to say, I'm going to manipulate truth so that I get what I want, or or what really matters here is power relations, and all truth is a function of, the kind of stuff you learn in college.
Sure. Yeah.
That it's, and kids are still working from the assumption that, no, there are things that are true and things that aren't true.
Mm-hmm.
And, and so I'm going to approach the world from that point of view. Sometimes I hear people talking about re-enchanting the world. Like the artist's job is to re-enchant the world because we as we grow up, we grow disenchanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that language. But I've also been thinking a little bit about the idea that maybe we need to, that's the assumption that kids, that when you say I'm now disenchanted, that's assuming that somehow I know what's truer than what kids do. That when I was, and it's possible that an enchantment is a spell that's been cast on you. That's what enchantment means. And I wonder if it's possible that we're the ones it's the grown-ups who are enchanted.
Mm.
Maybe what we need is to be disenchanted.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways it's just saying the same thing in opposite ways. But sometimes I find it helpful to think in terms of, my job as a writer, as a creative person, maybe it's not to re-enchant, but to disenchant.
Mm-hmm.
To say, no, here's what's real.
Yeah, I feel like, and we've talked about this before, how part of the storytelling process is finding out, is discovering, and the process of writing reveals what's the most true. And I was, we were talking about book writing, but I was thinking about a song I wrote years ago. I was writing a song for my son, who we had adopted, and I wanted to approach it from the perspective that I can't write a song about adoption without at least addressing that it begins with something sad. I didn't want to go too hard and sad on it. I wanted it to be a fun kids song, but I didn't want to leave that unsaid. So I remember the first line I had written was, I was born into a family where I could not stay, and sure I cried. Wouldn't you? But that was my beginning. Just turn the page, and then you'll find in chapter 2 how love had a plan for me. And I was never quite settled with it because it just felt a little. That is a little dark. It's hard, yeah. But I was going for. I wanted to teach that this is hard. The point is, I was aiming for a thing I thought I wanted to say. But the more I showed it to people, friends that had adopted kids, the consensus was, yeah, you can't sing that. That's going to make everybody too sad. So I just kept praying and thinking and working, and what I began to strive for was, okay, if this is too sad, what's the most true thing I can I go even deeper with not thinking about something I wanted to teach, but what can I learn?
Yeah.
And what occurred to me eventually was that we're all born into a sad story. We're all born into a broken world. We're broken people. And we've all got to navigate this world with a limp and figure out how we fit in. And so that brought me to the line that finally landed, which is, I was born into a story full of twists and turns, even the scary kind, and that's the truth. Then that was my beginning, but just turn the page, and there you'll find in chapter 2 how love had a plan for me. So in stopping trying to teach something and beginning to listen at what I had to learn, I landed on something that was even more true, both for adopted kids, but also just for everybody.
Yeah. I love that humble approach to, if I'm coming in with a didactic plan for my listener, my reader, whatever, I'm limiting myself to what I already know, right?
Yeah.
And so you opened yourself up to something that was more than what you thought you knew it at first.
Yeah, and it's funny, I don't usually approach things like that thinking, okay, this is what I want to say. But that time I did, and it was great proof that has a terrible limitation. There's such a low ceiling for what you can do when you're going in saying, here's what I'm going to teach you. Rather than, all right, I have an idea, but I know I don't know enough. So, what can I
Coming
learn?
in with questions instead of answers led to something good. And I have to say, there's a lot I like about that story. I mean, there was friendship was involved, like, your friends stepping in and saying, "Let me help you with this." Although some of the same friends who said, we've got
You need your friends. You need your friends. For sure.
right. But then I'm really interested in this idea that you insisted that it was important to you to tell this hard part of the story in a kid's song, right? I mean, I know you looked for another way to do it, but what you didn't say is, this is kind of dark, and I'm not going to, this is supposed to be a happy song, so we're going to avoid the dark.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's. I don't want to interrupt where you're going. Yeah, that is such a. It's such a common misconception that people come in with writing for kids, which is they are afraid of asking too much of them. Like I don't want to ask them to think that deeply or that, but I feel like it's the opposite problem. We ask too little of them. Kids have experienced every emotion just about that we have. They understand pride and anger and jealousy and grief. They've been there. By the time they're 6, they've experienced all of it.
Flannery O'Connor said, anybody who survived childhood has enough material to be writing for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. And so I think we just forget, as adults, we forget that kids have this vast emotional depth. And it's again part of being sincere, taking them seriously, is saying that here's a full 7-year-old person, a full 9-year-old person, that and how can I communicate to them in such a way that reveals that I take them seriously? Well, you can begin by actually taking them seriously, and considering I have something to learn from you, but I have also been alive longer, so I'm better at telling stories, than a 6-year-old. So I'm gonna use my giftedness at telling a story and be inspired by their sincerity, to try to come up with something that resonates.
That's great. So, am I correct in my assumption that even that song that I'm adopted, that starts out, and it's just a couple of lines of sadness, but there's a little bit of sadness in there. Do you think you would have had a hard time pushing that song through the pipeline if you'd been on a record label because this was an independent. Slugs and Bugs is all independent.
All independent, right? Yeah.
And so you have this artistic, intellectual freedom that not everybody has.
Yeah, it is so great. It is such a great just perk of not being with a label. I can't really speak to it, what it would have been like, because I've never been. I've only heard stories. But along the way, I have had different people in management and other situations that have tried to steer me in ways that were more or less marketable the way they perceived. And
you told me a story once about you mentioned Obama. You run pajamas with Obama. I was like, you can't talk.
That's right. And they're like, well, you a lot of Christians don't like Obama. You're gonna have to take him out. And I thought, you're crazy. I love that. I love that.
Nothing else rhymes with Obama with pajamas.
So it is a great perk about writing for kids. And another thing is that there's no box of like stylistically. I can go from like an arena rock song into like a jazz piece into like a late 2000s pop. I mean, I can do anything as long as it's melodic and captivating artistically. The kids will go They got no expectations of, oh, this is not like his last record. So there's so much freedom in that. It's a great fit for me.
You're saying because you're writing for kids, because you're not on a label, what are you?
All that. Because I'm writing for children, I'm able to have all the freedom I could ever want with stylistically. Because I'm not on a label, I'm certainly not hemmed in by those same things. A label would probably want you to stick near to your sound, whatever. And I don't know. I don't think I even have a sound. I just have a songwriting style.
Yeah.
But there are certainly advantages. And I mean, the way the music business has gone these days with the collapse of the record label, it's record labels. If I had a friend who was going to get signed by a record label, my first question would be, why are you signing with a record label? Like, what are they going to bring to the table that you can't do yourself? So.
Yeah. Okay. So you have this. I would say you have a unique vision, unique voice. Is your approach? I mean, your approach to communicating with kids is, if not unique, very unusual. I mean, the seriousness with which you take them, all that sort of thing. And the work you do requires a lot of collaboration with people who may or may not have your unique vision. I mean, by definition, if it's unique, then the people you're working with don't have your vision. I want to talk about that. Okay, I've had a lot of my guests have talked about collaboration, and it's always a very, happy, but we spend most of our time talking about the advantages of collaboration.
Sure.
And I know you have benefited hugely from collaboration.
Sure, yeah.
But I keep trying to get people to talk about the challenges of collaboration. And I feel like maybe you've got something to say about that because, you have this unusual perspective.
Yeah. So you're right. Like, collaboration has been just such a gift to me and through the years. In some ways, in a lot of ways, it's helped me grow as a disciple because in order to collaborate, you've just got to die. You've got to fall on your sword over and over again because it's loving someone else. It's listening to them more than it's holding loosely to what you've created.
Yeah.
But for sure, there are times where I'm thinking of a handful right now. Times where you're part of the process. You're collaborating with someone, hopefully, that you trust.
Right.
So part of the good part of collaborating is trusting them, and then in having let go, you see, oh, they brought something really fun to the table, and then you build on that.
Yeah.
But sometimes you trust them, and you realize, well, that didn't work. So let's try something else.
Yeah, I'm kind of asking leading questions here. I'm just going to get right to the example I had in mind.
Okay,
because,
sure.
You've got the Slugs and Bugs television show, which what I've seen of it is just so great. I can't wait for everybody to see that show.
Yeah, it's crazy that there even exists.
I know,
Slugs
and
Bugs
obviously, television is such a collaborative. It's one of the most collaborative art forms there is. And then in your case, you knew pretty much nothing about television,
right?
And so you were so dependent on everybody. I mean, from the even though you're a writer, you're not a screenwriter, and so you had to depend on all that. You're depending on people for everything. And I remember, you had your first set of scripts.
Oh yeah, I brought you and Pete and AP.
And I remember looking at it and thinking, okay, as TV scripts go, it looks like whoever wrote this knew exactly what they were doing.
Yeah.
But it doesn't look like Randall.
Right. Yeah, I remember thinking, this seems like a TV show that someone would make, but it's not the TV show I want to make.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, what? I couldn't articulate why. And you guys were so helpful with helping me see that what this is doing is, what it's missing is the things that I bring.
Yeah.
Whatever nuance and ways of approaching children. I think part of it was what we've been talking about, not taking kids seriously enough. It's like the writers had approached approached some topics, talking to kids as if they needed to learn instead of talking to kids as if they're just people we're with.
Yeah.
And so it was hugely helpful to get that feedback, and then to go back again and again to the writers and say, hey, here's what we want to, here's how we want to communicate. And it was a challenge to communicate what's important about Slugs and Bugs, valuing, talking about serious things in a way that is respectful of children. Not that they were being disrespectful, but you're right, it was different. And so we ended up actually bringing in someone from our community, as you know, Doug McKelvey, who I just knew and trusted would be a great communicator. He's an experienced screenwriter, and he was able to kind of bridge the gap between these other writers that were great at sort of arcing a story and aligning scenes and some character development, but the actual, like the little language that matters so much in the way that people are speaking to another. I remember you saying, I don't know anybody that talks to each other this way, the way that these people are talking to each other in the story. It seems like a made-up world that doesn't really exist, and that's
talk to each other the way people talk to each other on TV shows,
right? That's not how we wanted to communicate. We wanted to communicate as people really living together would. So that was that built on itself in such a wonderful way, because y'all's feedback helped me to get to Doug, who ended up writing a ton of it.
Yeah. Well, I just remember thinking about your situation, as I was thinking about the sort of fix you were in, where you were completely dependent on these people who know way more than you do about television. And yet you had to say, 90% of this y'all know more than I do, but in the core of this, I'm the only person who can do this.
Yeah.
And I've got to stand my ground. I mean, I there had to have been so many times when you were having to negotiate, do I stand my ground here? Do I know what I'm talking about? Do I not know what I'm talking about?
Oh my gosh, yeah, it was like a minefield of that. I was I'm 45 years old. I could not have done it at 35.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, because the amount of confidence you have to have in yourself and your own vision, I just wouldn't have had at 35.
Yeah.
The willingness to be wrong. I would have rather been. I would rather just let it go, because I was afraid I'd be wrong.
Right.
But to be able to stand on my own 2 feet and say, you know what, this still isn't right. I know it's going to tick them off.
Yeah.
But it's still
and
not right.
I know y'all worked really hard on this.
Yeah, but I ended up rewriting a ton of the really nuanced kind of gospel talk, because it still kind of wasn't right. I remember we were in an episode recording, and the episode recording, we did 13 shows in less than 2 weeks.
Good grief.
And so we were moving so fast, and sometimes I wasn't even being able to look at other people's lines. I was just looking at mine to memorize them and fixing them and changing them to sort of fit the way I wanted these things to communicate. And we did an episode with Jason Eskridge, who's a brilliant singer, a wonderful guy, sung on a ton of Slugs and Bugs stuff. And he said a line, I wish I could remember what it was, that we finished the scene, and I said, I'm sorry, we've got to stop. What he just said about how we listen to Jesus or live out the gospel, we just can't say it that way. It was saying things that, something that sounded true, like, and don't forget Jesus died for your sins, so now we can live with him every day. And but I think what the problem with those kinds of answers is they happen a lot of times, not every time. They happen a lot of times when people aren't really listening.
Yeah.
We've all experienced, whether we've seen it happen or we've experienced ourselves, people giving easy answers to us.
Yeah.
And when someone gives you an easy answer, what you mean is you're saying something that sounds true but doesn't impact me at all.
Yeah.
It's just noise. It's just,
I don't have to listen because I already know what you're saying.
Yeah. So that proves to me that you aren't loving me.
Mm-hmm.
You aren't loving me. You're you're saying something you already know that you think fits this situation, but you're not listening to me, the person. It makes me think of the passage when Jesus is talking to the NIV calls it the rich young ruler, where he says, "I've done all these things. I've honored my father and my mother. I've kept the commandments. I've done all these things since I was a boy. What more can I do?" Mm-hmm. And it says Jesus loved him and said, "Well, there's one thing you lack. Go sell everything to the poor, give everything away to the poor, and then come and follow me." And it says he loved him before he said those things. And so what Jesus was doing was listening to the man, like what that guy needed. Yeah. He knew this is going to hit you where you don't want to be hit. So I'm listening to you, the specific person in front of me. I'm not giving an answer, a platitude that could sort of, make me feel good about having remembered some abstract truth. Yeah. And whatever his script line was in that scene, it was some abstract platitude. And I just said, okay, let's stop and figure out what is it that would actually address this person in this moment, in this scene, and then we can move on.
Yeah. I love that insight that listening is important to writing. That's great. And it's kind of what you've been talking about this since we sat down here, right? The adoption song you managed to get right because you were listening.
Sure.
And not just I'm going to tell you kids something, but I'm going to listen to what you need, to be what I need, and it was in that listening that you found your way. I love that insight.
And it's funny talking about TV. So there's so often you don't have time to even that moment was a risk because we had to stop everything, and everything's moving on such a quick schedule, and thankfully it wasn't a long passage I had to rewrite, but a big part of working in that scenario is trying to be as prepared as you can ahead of time, because we happen to have the luxury of a moment to address it. But sometimes I'm sure there's lots of times where I'm not listening because I'm just focusing so hard on trying to remember my lines. Yeah. But yeah, I think, of course, listening's got to be important. Yeah. Otherwise, it's like you said, it's coming to a situation as if I already know everything. Yeah. Which I certainly don't. Mm-hmm. I don't want to. I just want to always be learning. Yeah. Well, that's really helpful. I'm really glad we got to that point. I mean, this idea of listening, and I think it's so important to everything you've been talking about, including collaboration, right? Mm-hmm. And in collaboration, in the collaboration that you've described here, it's always listening to your friends, listening to your collaborators. And then there's also this idea that you've got to listen to that vision. You listen to vision. That's a mixed metaphor, but you had this unique vision that is why you're doing this. Mm-hmm. And insofar as your collaborators can help you bring that vision to life, great. Mm-hmm. And by the way, and that doesn't make you the center of the world. It just makes you the center of this particular project. And there are other situations in which you're helping somebody else make their vision. Mm-hmm. And come into the world. And I never feel like, thankfully, I never feel like, even though I'm carrying the vision, mm-hmm. the vision I'm carrying is to serve. I'm thinking of other people. Yeah. So I'm never afraid that I'm going to be, autocratic or demagogish about it. Yeah. Because when I'm fighting for something, I'm not fighting for me. I'm fighting for the kids. And the way that the Lord has shaped my heart to serve them. So it's easy to in some respects to stop the set and go, nope, this isn't right.
Yeah.
Because I'm not fighting for me necessarily. I'm fighting for the kids that will watch this.
Yeah. I love it. All right, last question.
Sure.
Who are the writers who make you want to write?
Oh, great. Yeah, you know what? My answer is going to be so probably like everybody else you have on here, because I am right now in the middle of reading The Lord of the Rings again for like the fourth time. And I'm on like chapter 7 or 8, and I was telling somebody the other day, chapter 5 is where Sam and Merry and Pippin reveal to Frodo that they've known all along that he's going to try to leave. And they sort of reveal it to him in such a way. He's all frustrated with them because he's like, well, I can't trust anybody. I can't even trust my own friends. And they say, well, you can trust us not to let you go into peril alone. And that just made me cry. I had to stop and just, it's like, just friendship. You know how it so poignantly points to the call of our hearts to friendship. So Tolkien makes me want to write, but also as far as writing for kids, Kate DiCamillo, her book, The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane.
What an amazing
I can
book.
just read it again and again and again, and talk about someone that's not afraid to take kids seriously.
Yeah.
The characters in her book go through everything, hard, sad things.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I love them, because they don't feel like children's stories. They just feel like stories.
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis talks about there's 3 kinds of kids' stories. One is the bad kind, which is thinking, I have something to teach you. The second kind is the kind that you tell to a particular kid. You're telling a story to one child. And then the third kind is the kind that he said he wrote, which was a story that the best way you know how to tell a story is to tell it in a form that would be good for children. And I feel that way about it. Like I'm also reminded of Maurice Sendak, who I'm a huge fan of, and the way that he's very happy to have children eaten by animals.
Yeah.
He said, I don't write for kids. I just write.
Yeah.
People say that kids like my stories. And I don't go quite that far. I think of kids while I'm writing, but the way that Kate is, she respects them enough to speak to them about the full gamut of the human experience is super inspiring. So if your listeners out there don't know her, go read her books.
Yeah. I know she makes you want to write. She makes you want to be a better person. Makes you want to hug your kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not the first person on the Habit podcast to say Kate DiCamillo is their person that makes them want to write.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Well, they should go get her books.
That's right. All right, man. Thanks so much.
You're welcome, Jonathan. This is so fun, man. You do a great job.
So do you. See you, man.
Oh, all right. See you.
The Rabbit Room has partnered with Lipscomb University to make this podcast possible. Lipscomb has graciously given us access to their recording studio and the Center for Entertainment and Arts building. We're so grateful for their sponsorship, their encouragement, and the good work they do in Nashville. Special shout out as well to the Arcadian Wild for allowing us to use their delightful song Finch in the Pantry as part of this podcast. Check out their album of the same name for more excellent music.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
This podcast was produced by The Rabbit Room, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to fostering Christ-centered community and spiritual formation through music, story, and art. All our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.